behavior is gonna need to do something about that. So DCing and dying on first hook has become more and more popular. Just the other day over on X, I've seen so many posts, and this is taking the community by storm, of many survivors disconnecting or dying on first hook at the very slightest inconvenience there possibly could be. From first-hand experience, I load into a game as Trapper, and people just DC. Don't even get caught in a trap, don't even get hit, 5 gens, automatically DC. And this has been the mentality of a lot of survivors recently, but this is more deep-rooted than we think, and there's a lot of implications. Nonetheless, it is a problem, and there are solutions that can be put forward. So today, we're going to talk about the history of DCing, how this really came into fruition, why so many people are doing it excessively now, the solution DBD had and how that eventually failed, the potential solutions, and some of the actual solutions to the entire problem. Let's jump on into it. So, a brief history of DCing in Dead by Daylight. Obviously, the leave option has always been in the game. This isn't something that just appeared one day and people started to use. I want to take you all the way back to when the Legion was originally introduced into the game. When the Legion was in the game, initially the balancing was honestly terrible. And because of this, there literally was no counterplay to the Legion whatsoever. There was literally nothing you can do. Eventually, you would just die. You couldn't stop them. So people figured, why would I even play if I can't win? Realistically, there's no point in playing if I cannot beat this character. So they would just leave the game. Understandably so, because you're not going to win regardless. There's absolutely no point. You can't get better at it. And it kind of was a big alarm for a lot of the players. At the time, a lot of the popular streamers were doing this. Because of this, their audience started to do it themselves. And then those folks had their friends that did it. And this had a pretty everlasting impact on Dead by Daylight. It's something that got really popularized really quickly to the point where it started happening so much, not just against the Legion, because the Legion was eventually fixed. DCs were still skyrocket high. Dead by Daylight had to introduce the disconnect penalty. With this penalty, you would get a 5 minutes up to a maximum of, I'm not exactly sure, I think it's like 2 days or something like that. Basically, the more you DC, the harsher that penalty becomes, and this is a way to discourage people from actually leaving the game. So for a while, this actually worked. People just decided not to DC, and they kind of went back to the old mindset of things. Now, eventually, Dead by Daylight did add survivor bots into the game, which was kind of a great solution. If someone ended up disconnecting, instead of just having an empty slot like you did before, you would just be replaced with a bot. Then the team can have a bot player. Everybody's kind of happy. You don't lose a teammate if you're on the survivor team that didn't disconnect. And if you did DC, you can just take your penalty, wait a little bit, carry on to your next game. And if it was true, you only disconnect at some sort of inconveniences, such as tunneling or camping or facing the same exact killer over and over again, then you'd be fine because chances are that wasn't going to happen to you again. And this worked for a very long time. Until people started to evade this ban and evade this punishment of disconnecting by dying on first hook or just practically giving up in the entire match. This put the team and the killer in a very awkward situation because let's say the person decided to die on first hook. Now that issue that was resolved is back again. The team is now a 3v1 against a killer and you have to do 5 generators. It is quite unlikely that you're going to win that match, which makes it super lopsided. And in the killer's POV, you either have to go out there and be a dick to everybody, kill them all, or just kind of farm. And nobody really wants to do either of those options. If the person decides to stay in the match and just give up, again, the killer, you're pretty much going to be stuck in a tough situation where you just have to kill them. There's not really much else that you can do, and you could leave them there and just ignore them because they're technically wasting your time too, but again, you're just going to look like a dick. So it's such an awkward situation. And that's the state of Dead by Daylight right now. Essentially, there are just tons of people that DC at the beginning of the game for the slightest inconvenience. As I said, I've played Trapper and people just disconnect because they see that I'm Trapper. I've seen clips of someone just playing as Blight. They hit someone once and that's it. The person just completely gives up. And there's multiple instances of this happening throughout and throughout. So you got your people that just DC, you have your people that just give up, you have people that die on first hook, all in which are one and the same problem. Now there's 2 sides to this argument, as there is with most arguments. The one side is saying, hey, you paid for your game, you can do what you want. If you don't want to sit there and play something that's going to make you miserable, don't do it, because It's a game. You should be having fun. Leave, find a better match, go have some fun elsewhere. And you guys know me. I try to see the perspective of everybody. And in some extent, I can understand this. If you're being tunnel and camped every single game that you played all day today, turning off the game, not playing it anymore, I completely understand that. If you're playing against the same exact killer for like 4th time in a row and it's Skull Merchant for the 4th time in a row, I can understand that as well, why you'd want to leave. Personally, what I won't understand is if you load into a game, you see someone like Nurse and you just instantly DC. You don't even attempt to salvage the game. You don't try to get better. You don't care about the rest of your team. You basically load it into a team-based scenario and you're saying, screw the team, I'm going to think about myself. To me, it is a pretty selfish standpoint that you're going from because you're only putting yourself in that situation. You're thinking about yourself and you're just carrying on. Again, I'm not here to tell you how to play. If you want to do it, go and do it. That's completely up to you. And one of the big drilling points that these people are saying is they don't want to play against sweaty killers or they need DBD to fix the issues that's making them DC. We'll get to that in a second. The other side are arguing that you pretty much loaded into a team game, as I said, and you're screwing over the entire team. If you're not going to sit there and play, why even queue up in the first place? If you're going to just leave at any slight inconvenience that you don't like. On top of that, how would you ever become better at the game if you always just DC whenever there's something that you don't like? Now, again, I can understand this argument as well, because if you're loading in as a survivor and one of your survivors disconnect, you're pretty much going to lose that game. You're going to try to do something, but you're going to end up losing if the person decides to give up on first hook. Now, if there is a bot, admittingly, you can salvage it because you do have a bot. It's not the same as having a regular player in the game, and it will still hinder you to an extent, but it's better than having someone completely die on first hook. Nonetheless, it's not the most ideal option in the world. So originally, Dead by Daylight's plan worked. If people wanted to DC, they could. You get a bot, and then that was great. What happened was, as I said, people decided to dodge this punishment, essentially, that was put in place to stop people from DCing in the first place by just dying on first hook, and this has just been going on and on and on for a very long time. So what exactly are the solutions that Dead by Daylight can go forth and try to fix this issue? Well, as one side argues, they need to figure out the problems and fix those problems of what makes everybody DC. The issue with that is that everyone has their own POV. It is completely subjective on what you might think is something that Dead by Daylight needs to fix, especially when you go along the different MMRs. Someone can absolutely hate Trapper, for example, think he's the most overpowered killer in the game and DC anytime they see a Trapper. Then someone might see a Blight, assume they're going against a super sweaty killer, an S-tier killer. Let's not stick around in his lobby. I don't want to deal with it. Then you might have people that feel that maybe they're more entitled to their DC because they're getting tunneled every single match or camped every single match by a Skull Merchant, and they're just not really into it at that point, so they leave. So no matter what DBD does, they're never going to find the proper solution to adhere to this. So that's, in a way, a lazy response to just say, well, behavior needs to do it. It's not my fault. We then have some of the extremes on the other side as well that says that people that die on first hook should also get the DC penalty, but you really can't keep people hostage in a game. At the end of the day, if someone really does want to leave, you can't force them to stay into the game. It's just not feasible, and it's not fair to them as well. If you do want to end up leaving, you should have that option to leave. Now, if you haven't really seen what's going on, this can be boiled down even more into Dead by Daylight being competitive or Dead by Daylight being casual. If you think it's a casual game, you're more than likely to DC because who cares? Just move on to the next. It's just a game, carry on. If you're playing more competitively, maybe you care about your MMR, you care about winning your matches, you're more than likely never to DC. You can see this because Dead by Daylight actually has a penalty for this as well, whereas more ranked or competitive games, if you end up leaving that match, you will be hit with an abandonment penalty. Look at Apex, for example. If you're playing rank and you decide to leave, you're hit with a 15-minute timer. And that's pretty harsh. If you keep doing it, that timer extends and extends and extends. So Dead by Daylight, their stance is pretty clear. They think that regular good old DBD is competitive, and the more you DC against this, then the more you're actually going to get penalized for it. I saw some great analogies on this from Shy on Twitter, basically saying that it's like the people with the shopping carts at the grocery store that don't put their carts back. They're like, well, I paid for my groceries, so who cares if I put the cart back? Same with the movie theater, making a mess. Well, I paid for the movie. I'm going to leave all my mess here. It's someone else's job to do it. I'm going to leave. I love that analogy. It's really, really good. Personally, I will never understand this perspective. I always try to put my feet in someone else's shoes to see and understand, and I can see and understand it, but I just personally can never do it. I never DC whatsoever, and I'm not saying that as a prideful thing. I just see an uphill battle, and I accept the challenge. I try to learn and adapt and maybe somehow win that game, salvage that game. And to me, that's fun. And again, that's subjective. That might not be fun to you, and that's completely fine. So what are the actual solutions that we can do to get rid of this nuclear option? Something Ott spoke about way long ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago in a podcast. The nuclear option of just leaving to leave because you don't like something. Well, there's one solution that's been floating around that everyone also has been saying, which is just completely remove the DC penalty, which on paper sounds good. If you leave, you'll get a bot, so everybody would be happy. But then, on the flip side, everybody will DC every single game. And Dead by Daylight, as I said, has pretty much made their stance saying that this is a competitive game, so you're going to get hit with a penalty for that. So you're not going to enjoy that. So if you get rid of it, everyone's going to DC. We notice firsthand for when the times the DC penalty was off for one reason or another, and DC's always skyrocketed. So it's not necessarily a good idea to do this. We're here to fix the issues, not create more. And eventually that'll just be a bigger issue because people will complain about playing with survivor bots the entire time. Here's one of the proposed solutions that I think would work quite well, and that's just to lower the DC penalty, not necessarily make it as harsh, so you're not sitting there with like 2-day timers. I feel like in extreme cases, people don't want to sit out for an excessively long amount of time. They don't want to sit for an hour of 2 hours. Sure, there's an inconvenience. I'm never going to convince you otherwise that that is not an inconvenience. You're going to leave or die no matter what. So if the penalty was maybe 5-10 minutes, maybe that's enough time for you to cool off, to get your head straight again and get into another match and get ready to play. And maybe that 5-10 minutes is pretty good, and that's where it should be at its max. That way people will DC and it'll be a little bit less because there's still a penalty. People wouldn't want to take that penalty. They might as well just continue playing the game, and it doesn't necessarily stop people from dying on first hook. There's not really a true proper solution to that one. I guess killers will just have to not kill them, but then you're just holding them there, which is a weird feeling. Nonetheless, I digress. I think this is still one of the valid options that they can do. People might DC, you might get more bots in your game, but they're probably less likely to do it knowing the punishment isn't super duper long, so why even do it? Next solution that is a bit more ambitious and definitely could cause a few more problems, and again, we're trying to avoid those problems, but that's queuing up people that DC quite often with other people that DC quite often. Queuing up people that pretty much play out their entire games and they continue to play. You can see the stats on how long they play with those same people. And then have the middle for pretty much those in the middle. Obviously, that sounds fantastic on paper. If you DC a lot and you get DCs in your game, you shouldn't complain because you're doing the exact same thing. On the flip side, if you never DC, you're also going to get people that do the same thing. It kind of, in a way, separates the queues into casual and competitive. But the underlying issue is that queue times, it's going to be really, really long. There's a lot of things that already go when it comes down to matchmaking based on region, based on MMR. So if you're doing another prerequisite, it might take a long time with those queues, and nobody likes long queues. So again, it creates another issue that we don't really want. So maybe not the best solution, but a solution nonetheless. Finally, we have the solution that DBD has been doing for a very long time for a lot of things, and it could potentially work. It's a bit ambitious. You do nothing. DBD always has peaks and valleys with people complaining about multitude of different things. Now, I'm not saying that people complaining about this is or isn't justified. Personally, I think it is justified because if every single match you're playing has someone quitting or DCing, it is rather annoying. But eventually, if some way there's like double blood points or a new chapter or a new event, eventually people will DC and stop giving up as frequently because there's something else to work towards. So maybe you just do nothing, let it die down, and then carry on. And if it does become even more intense, then at that point you look into it. The ED has kind of been doing this for a very long time since bots and the DC penalty has been introduced into the game. There really hasn't been any changes to it whatsoever. And there definitely has been peaks and valleys of people complaining about it, people not complaining about it. So that is an option. At the end of the day, you guys know my opinion on what I feel about this. I think it does suck. It's kind of like one of those things. Look at it on those moral and society classes. You know, if one person is suffering and 3 people or 4 people in this case are happy, then 4 outweighs the 1. If 4 people are unhappy but 1 person's happy, then again, the 4 outweighs the 1. That's how I am going to personally see it, because that's just my opinion. That's my view. I'm not someone that DCs. I'm not someone that goes around dying on first hook. It's just not me. I can understand, again, like I said, I can understand the perspective. Maybe you're getting camp, maybe you're getting tunnel, maybe it is something that you just really don't like. Maybe you have a phobia and you can't play against a certain killer or a certain map. I can understand the extents to certain things. The ones that I just cannot wrap my head around is when there's something that is super mildly inconvenient and you just don't want to play against that. At that point, you shouldn't queue up for DBD. You shouldn't play DBD. You shouldn't put the entire teams, you shouldn't screw over your entire team just because of your personal entitlement. And again, that boils down more to that casual versus competitive mindset as well. You can almost simmer it down to that. But that's kind of where we stand with the DC issues and dying on first hook. Let me know what you guys think about it. This has been more of a discussion video rather than a solution or anything like that. It's been a fun one though, and I hope you guys did enjoy. Let me hear your thoughts and opinions down below. I'm very curious to hear how you guys are feeling about all of this. I also want to remind you that my second channel, I'm starting to upload it on it again. It's been a very long time since I've uploaded, so there's a video out there. You guys can go ahead and take a look. We're talking about why most of the DBD games end up failing and why there really isn't any success. So make sure you guys are checking out the second channel for that. Don't forget, we are going to be live on stream every single week, Monday to Thursday, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hopefully we see you guys there. And next week on the 27th, I'm doing a bidathon. My birthday is on October the 5th, but I'm doing the bidathon a little bit early, so hopefully I'll see you guys there. But that's going to do it for me. As always, I'm the king. I tip my crown to you guys, and we'll see you in the fog.